Welcome to my Unit 1 Social 30 project video on Queen Elizabeth II. Make sure you pay close attention throughout the film, as all of the Kahoot answers are found within. Good morning, everyone. Throughout the course of this video, I'm going to teach you about the Honorable Queen Elizabeth II and our country's connection to the royal family. Many Canadians are surprised to hear that Canada is a monarchy. During our studies here in Social 30, we know Canada was once a colony of Britain, but unlike many of England's other former colonies, Canada never experienced a complete break from the motherland. Our independence as a country has evolved slowly under British supervision. The continuing legacy of Canada's connection with British is through the Queen. The Canadian Constitution shares terms that state the King or Queen of the United Kingdom is also recognized as the King or Queen of Canada. Before I begin teaching about Canada's connection with the British monarchy, I'm going to take a minute to answer the question: who really is Queen Elizabeth II? Queen Elizabeth was born as Princess Elizabeth Alexandra Mary on April 21, 1926, at her grandmother's house, 17 Bruton Street, Westminster. She was born to Prince Albert, Duke of York, later known as King George VI, and her mother, the former Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, more famously known as Queen Mother. Elizabeth and her younger sister Margaret were educated at home. They were taught history, geography, grammar, literature, French, music, and dancing. At the time of her birth, she was third in line to the throne, and no one would have ever thought she would become queen. That all changed quickly in 1936 when Elizabeth's grandfather died and her uncle became king. He was only king for 11 months before he chose to step down to follow through with a marriage of his choice. This opened up the throne for Elizabeth's father, King Edward VI, and made Princess Elizabeth the next heiress to the throne. At the age of 13, Elizabeth met her future husband, Prince Philip. They married in the autumn of 1947 and quickly began making a family. Prince Charles was born 1 year later in 1948 and their daughter Anne in 1950, followed by their son Prince Andrew in 1960 and Prince Edward in 1964. With these 4 children, she was blessed with 8 grandchildren and 5 great-grandchildren. In 1952, Princess Elizabeth's father died and she assumed her responsibilities of the ruling monarch at only 25 years old. She was officially crowned queen on June 2, 1953, at Westminster Abbey. Now that we know a little more about who she is and how she came about being the Queen of Canada, we will get into how she affects our country. Our second question is, does the Queen have power over Canada? This is a very common question, and the answer is somewhat double-sided. On one hand, many people think the Queen doesn't do very much. Some see her role as simply to cut ribbons, shake hands, and smile for photographers, but she truly is more than that. The Canadian Constitution gives the Queen many political powers. In Canada, we declare that the executive, government, and authority of and over Canada will always be vested in her. The Queen is said to be the head of Canada's Parliament and the Commander-in-Chief of the Canadian Armed Forces. The Queen of Canada has a duty to appoint a Governor-General who acts at the federal level for her. The appointed Governor-General then appoints a Lieutenant Governor in each of Canada's provinces. Canada is known as a constitutional monarchy. The monarch delegates her powers to the country's elected politician. This means the power is held by Queen Elizabeth, but lent to the elected Prime Minister of our country. The Prime Minister is to govern Canada on the Queen's behalf and pass laws in her name using her authority. Lastly, the Queen is described as Canada's head of state, a symbolic political figure, whereas the Prime Minister is described as the head of government, the actual ruler of the country. Question number 3 is, does Canada agree about being a monarchy? Not everyone in Canada loves being part of a monarchy. In fact, the debate is about 50-50. The debate includes one side that believes continuing our ties to the royal family is useful, where the other side believes that it undermines Canada's independence. Although there has yet been a political party in Canada in favor of cutting ties with the royals, there are 2 popular groups that often debate this topic in the media. They are known as the Monarchist League of Canada and Citizens for a Canadian Republic. Monarchist Canadians believe that the monarchy is an important symbol of our country's history and heritage. They argue that Queen Elizabeth and her family are uplifting and positive role models that our nation should be proud to endure. Moving into question number 4, how was Queen Elizabeth II involved in World War II? In England during World War II, men were doing the fighting, which left many non-combative jobs neglected. These positions were filled by recruited women. These women formed the Auxiliary Territorial Service in 1938. These women worked as drivers, bakers, postal workers, and mechanics. Among many other women in the ATS was the famous Princess Elizabeth, future Queen Elizabeth II. When Elizabeth had turned 18 years old, she joined the ATS. This movement took her months and months of begging and pleading her father, King George VI, to join. Throughout her time in the Auxiliary Territorial Service, Queen Elizabeth was trained as a driver and a mechanic. She was taught to change wheels, take apart and put back together engines, as well as drive ambulances and other heavy-duty military trucks. Only 5 months after her training ended, she was promoted to Honorary Junior Commander. Despite not minding getting dirty in work, Princess Elizabeth was still a royal and returned to the Windsor Castle after every day to sleep. To this day, Queen Elizabeth II remains the only female member of the royal family to join the military and is the only living head of state that has served in World War II. Our fifth question is, how many times has the Queen visited Canada? Throughout the Queen's years on the throne, she has visited our country 22 times. She was usually accompanied by her husband, Prince Philip, and their children, Prince Charles, Princess Anne, Prince Andrew, and Prince Edward. The Queen's tours of Canada has included every province and territory from coast to coast. I'm going to take you all into a deeper look at a few of these history-making visits. The Queen first visited Canada from October 12th to the 16th in 1957. During this visit, she spent the 4 days in Ottawa. The first session of the 23rd Parliament was officially opened by the Queen on October 14th. The Queen also took the time to speak to some of the children of Canada and told them that they should be proud to be the upcoming generation of such a wonderful and exhilarating country. In 1964, Queen Elizabeth arrived in Canada for an 8-day visit in Charlottetown, Quebec, and Ottawa. Here she attended many commemorating meetings that led to Canadian Confederation in 1867. During the visit to Quebec, they were in the middle of the Quebec protest. On October 10th, some of the protesters in Quebec City threatened harm on the Queen, which resulted in police charging the crowd. 3 years later, in 1967, the Queen returned to Canada, once again accompanied by Prince Philip. They stopped in Ottawa to celebrate Canada's 100th anniversary. During this 6-day tour, she also visited the Expo 67 in Montreal. In 1976, the Queen, along with her husband and 3 sons, visited Montreal to officially open the Canadian Olympic Games. The Queen's daughter, Princess Anne, took part in these Olympic Games as a member of the British equestrian team. In 1992, Queen Elizabeth returned to Canada for 3 days. She visited Ottawa, where they celebrated the 125th anniversary of Confederation and her 40th year on the throne. 5 years later, in 1997, Queen and her husband, Prince Philip, visited Newfoundland to celebrate the 500th anniversary of explorer John Cabot's arrival. Lastly, Queen Elizabeth II visited our beautiful province of Saskatchewan in 2005. During this week-long tour, she took the time to celebrate our centennial as a province. The sixth and final question is, has the Queen met with Canadian Prime Ministers? The answer is yes. During the Queen's 65 years on the throne, she has seen and met with many of Canada's Prime Ministers, including Prime Minister Louis St. Laurent in 1951. Queen Elizabeth visited Parliament Hill in Ottawa during the reign of John Diefenbaker. Queen Elizabeth was greeted by Prime Minister Lester B. Pearson and his wife at the Uplands Airport in Ottawa. In 1971, the Queen was welcomed to the Vancouver Airport by Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau and his wife Margaret. In 1984, Prime Minister Brian Mulroney and his wife Mila welcomed Queen Elizabeth II when she arrived for a state dinner in Winnipeg. Queen Elizabeth and Prime Minister Jean Chrétien sat together and laughed during an official dinner in Newfoundland. The Queen met Prime Minister Paul Martin in Regina, Saskatchewan in 2005 during one of her Canadian visits. The Queen had a number of meetings with one of Canada's recent Prime Ministers, Stephen Harper. Lastly, just 3 weeks after being sworn in as Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau visited Buckingham Palace to visit Her Majesty the Queen on November 25, 2015. If you were paying attention in this video, you will know who Queen Elizabeth is and how she received her crown. You will have learned that the Queen does have power over Canada, but in the name of politics, she hands the power over to the elected Prime Minister. Also, you know now that Canada is about 50-50 in agreement to maintaining our connection with the British monarchy. Although, Canada would require a constitutional amendment to cut the ties, and since there has been no political party involvement with the action, it will be a while until we say goodbye to the King-Queen symbol of Canada. You would have learned that the beautiful and honorable Queen Elizabeth isn't all just fancy dresses and jewelry. In fact, she isn't afraid to work hard and get a little dirty. Queen Elizabeth served in World War II as a mechanic and a heavy-duty truck driver. During this video, you would have learned that Queen Elizabeth II has visited our country 22 times to help us celebrate important developments as a country. Queen Elizabeth has met with almost all of Canadian Prime Ministers that have been in power throughout her reign. In conclusion of my video, I hope you have learned now that Queen Elizabeth does plenty more than cut ribbons and shake hands. She has and will continue to play an important role in the development of our wonderful country.